You're listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. Thank you for listening. I have been stunned by the response to this podcast. It's been downloaded 50,000 times in 100 countries. And that is because lots of you are sharing it with friends, for which I am deeply grateful. Today, my friend Autumn is going to read a story that is a beautiful illustration of what it can look like to engage a parent who has done harm. This story is from a very recent time in Autumn's life when she found herself caring for her sick mother. And for all of its redemptive beauty, there is nothing tidy about this story. You'll hear about Autumn's dysregulation and indeed her murderous rage at her mother. But you'll also hear about Autumn's fierce commitment to offer her mother the very thing that Autumn never received as a girl. It is truly an astonishing story. May we all hold Autumn's story with a sense of honor and gratitude, and may her courage and tenacity for good invite us to begin thinking, just to begin thinking about what it might look like to redemptively engage those who have harmed us, particularly our parents. I'm glad you're listening to my conversation with Autumn. All right, I am here with Autumn. And Autumn, can you say a bit about where you are geographically and just a bit about yourself?
I live in a small little town on the shores of Lake Michigan called Manitowoc, and I'm the director of counseling at my church. So what that means is we do a lot of story group work, and I direct all of the groups, and I do training and teaching as well.
When did you first learn that you had a story, and what did it look like for you to begin engaging your story?
When I first realized I had a story, interestingly enough, was watching Oprah Winfrey about maybe 30 years ago. And she had as guests on her show talking about childhood molestation. And I remember sitting there watching that show kind of with my jaw hanging on the ground going, what? That's what it's called? I had no idea. And just that naming of what child molestation was made me begin to start asking more questions and start being more curious. And I'm by nature a really curious person, which has gotten me into a lot of trouble over my lifespan. So I began really ferociously trying to figure it out. And then that led me to story work, doing groups here at church. I was director of women's ministry, and women would come to me with their stories. And I felt kind of incapable to help them beyond where I was at myself, and knew that I needed to understand more. And so that is what led me to get more training in what I was actually hoping to help people with.
And so as you begin to engage your own story, what's that like for you in the early years? What obstacles did you run into? What was it like?
Obstacles. Well, being an optimist, I was sure that I had not been really harmed by any of it. And so that was probably my greatest obstacle, was having to agree that, oh my gosh, there's carnage in the wake of my life, and I have to look at it. I didn't want to. And that was probably the greatest problem. I also think even my upbringing in the Christian church, that, you know what, you don't have to look at that stuff. Jesus heals. He's taking care of it.
It's almost as if, for many of us with Christian backgrounds, it's as if it's somehow unchristian to look at the darker places in our stories.
Yeah, it is. And you feel ashamed because of that. If you do, like, I'm doing something wrong, or I'm doing something anti-God, like he's going to be angry with me if I do look at this.
And so let's do something wrong. And you have graciously offered to read one of these stories. And this is a different story than many of the guests that we've had because it's a very recent story for you.
Right.
But it is so powerful in the linkages of a very present, within the past year, story, linkages with some of the core wars for you as a girl. So would you be willing to read it now?
I would be willing. After talking with my sister about the state of my mother's Alzheimer's, I knew that I wanted to make time to travel back to Michigan to visit and be with my parents. My sister had been caring for both of them for some time now and was exhausted, so I wanted to give her a reprieve by going and help with their care. In recent weeks, the weight of my mother's decline made the decision to begin having nursing assistants come in to care for them on a regular basis, something that needed to occur quickly. Since I have been working on my story for over a decade, I felt confident and hopeful that my time with my mother would be good. I had made peace with her and myself regarding the ways in which she had emotionally abandoned me. And yet, I could not answer the question why I had very little feeling for my mother. Knowing her time was coming to an end, I struggled to feel anything emotionally toward her. I wasn't sad. I didn't really even care. Not even a little bit. Why? I wanted to know why. The weekend of travel to Michigan came, and I planned out the timing I would care for my mother and visit with my father. Because she slept until almost 11 in the morning, my day would begin by waking her up and taking her to the bathroom and changed. As I approached her bed, I wasn't sure if she would know who I was or not. I had been preparing myself for that day, and even as I did, recognized the unemotional response my body had as I thought about it. The thoughts that would help me settle my heart sounded something like, she never really knew you anyway. She probably never loved you anyway. At least if I believed that to be true, I thought it would hurt less. But as I approached her bed, she turned to see me and softly said my name. Oh, it's Autumn. She seemed happy to see me. After helping my mother out of bed and into her morning ritual, I began to notice little things that had been places of harm in my younger years. I watched her as she counted out the 4 little toilet squares she used to wipe herself. The way that she would wash her hands as if she would wash hard enough to remove her skin. And then to comb her hair as she meticulously reparted her hair to get it just right. Every trip to the bathroom was the same, in order, in precise order. There was no rushing her, letting her take as long as she needed. As the day went on, we had visitors, little visitors, who were noisy and messy. I could see her eyebrows furrow, the way I always understood that if my noise level did not change, a spanking or a slap across the face was not far behind. But she said nothing. The confusion for her was, why were these little people in her space? I could tell she was tiring of the commotion. It was time for another trip to the bathroom, a good way to alleviate the tension I could see on her face. I noticed in myself how quickly I could attune to her, reading her well, something I had learned to do to keep myself safe. But this time, it was to help care for her. How times change. As we began to navigate the living room, I saw her need for cleanliness in order to jump out again. The kids had thrown a pillow on the floor, and in her anger, she sharply yelled, "Who did this?" "It's okay, Mom. I've got it." I picked up the pillow off the floor and neatly placed it on the chair. She looked at it and immediately turned the pillow a half turn so all the lines would line up together. Ah, the freedom I felt to chuckle under my breath. "Autumn, it was as bad as you remember. You are not crazy." The day had gone great. I was able to love my mother well. Evidence, I thought, of the healing God had done in my own heart. I took a break for dinner and let her know I would be back later to put her to bed. She was sitting in a chair waiting for her evening ritual TV shows to begin. She would be fine until I got back. As I came back in at 10 o'clock that evening, I moved to help my mother get out of her chair so that she could go to bed. "Come on, Mom," I said. "It's time for bed." "No," she said with a defiant, loud bark. "I don't want to go to bed." She began to pick up a stuffed kitten I had gotten her earlier in the year from when she had been in the hospital. She was ignoring me. She began playing with it to avoid having to listen to me and go to bed. After about a half an hour, I began to become agitated. Are you kidding me? What the hell?" I said in my head. "Come on, Mom. It's time for bed." This time I said it with a little more force. "No, I'm not going," she amped up a little more. I took the kitten out of her hands and told her that she would get the kitten back when she decided to cooperate with me. She in turn scooted her bottom firmer in the seat behind her. Did she just do what I think she did? I found myself becoming more and more angry as she went to pick up a prescription paper to read, in oppositional defiance of my order. I became acutely aware of the things I began to feel in my body. I wanted to pull her hair out. Maybe I should just drag her to bed, the little brat. What the hell? Maybe I should just kill her. My senses were so shocking to my heart, which had begun to beat with a rapid rhythm. I began talking to myself. "Autumn, you've had training. You know what to do. Take a breath. In through your nose. Slowly, slowly. Breathe through your nose. Think. Think." The rage was so loud. But as I began to breathe, I began to soften. What did I need from her that I never received? Attunement. Kindness. What would kindness look like? Do I even want to give her what she never gave me? The questions thundered in my head. My heart began to settle, and I knew instantly what I needed to do. I will offer her attunement, something that she could never give me as a child. I will give her in this moment something my heart longed for from her, but never received. Kindness. Move in with kindness. Slowly, I knelt down. I placed my hands on her knee and looked into her eyes. "Mom," I said softly, "why don't you want to go to bed? It's late and you're tired. You're yawning, and that tells me your eyes want to be shut and go to sleep." I held her eyes. She threw her head back and made a pff sound as she turned her head away from mine. I held my head in her direction, hoping to see her face again. She turned to face me. Her countenance softened. She looked at my eyes and leaned down toward my cheek and kissed it ever so softly. "I love you," she said to me. My heart began to weep as I realized that I had to be the one to parent my parent. But yet I felt full. Being able to engage my younger heart the way it so deserved to be engaged surprised me. There had been a part of my heart that I had not been able to reach until that moment. A dark part that had been hurting and lonely for 53 years. Melted, softened, and felt full.
Oh, thank you. Oh, there is so much heartache and glory and redemption in this story. So I'm wondering if we can just kind of go through it and reflect on it together.
Yes.
So let's go back to a portion at the beginning where you are confessing that here you are with your ailing mother and you're feeling very little. You're not sad. You don't even really care. And it can be very disconcerting to not feel anything toward our parents. I mean, to just be numb. And yet, it's very common for people with trauma to not have much feeling for their parents or for the people that have harmed them. And so it's so good that in the story, you realize you have very little feeling for your mom, and it leads to curiosity rather than self-contempt.
Yeah.
Most of the time in these situations, we'll just berate ourselves for being so cold and unfeeling to our parents. What kind of son am I? What kind of daughter am I? But you're showing a different response in the story. It's this sense of, wow, I don't feel much for my mom. Huh. Like, that's really interesting. I wonder why. Mm-hmm. Just so good. So, and frankly, so necessary for healing from harm and abuse. There has to be curiosity about our bodily responses rather than condemnation. So how is it that you came to a place of curiosity about what could have been a place of massive self-contempt as you're realizing that you just don't feel much for your mom?
Yeah, I think where that curiosity really became loud for me in my own heart was listening to my friends who are about my age with parents and talking about the sadness that they felt about where their parents were at, that they couldn't remember, that they were declining, that they might die soon, and what that meant. And I remember like thinking, gosh, I don't have any of those feelings. And I found myself longing to want to have those feelings. Like, I want my kids to feel that way when it's my turn, but why don't I feel that way with my own mom? And I would say even engaging with my own daughter, who's 21, in the way that we are so connected. And I love that, but thinking, I never had this with my mom. I never got to experience this with her. And again, not really feeling sad, but trying to figure out how come, could I be so angry, still?
Yeah. And as as the story unfolds, you approach her bed, unsure if she's going to know, who you are or not. Unsure, we could simply say, if she cares.
Right.
About your heart, about your person. And then you write this amazingly confessional sentence where you say that the thoughts that would help to settle your heart sounded like she never really knew you anyway. She probably never loved you anyway. So it's so honest to confess that sentences like this can actually bring some regulation to our hearts. If I believed it to be truth, I thought it would hurt less, is what you say. So can you say some more about that? What's happening for you there?
Yeah, I think I was, parenting my own heart in that moment. I was really wanting to just settle it and prepare for the worst. And when she did recognize me, I think I would say there was even a little skepticism, like, really? Okay, she remembers me, but okay, what does that really mean?
Is there authentic care here? Is there an authentic connection here?
Yeah.
There's a moment where, these little visitors come in, these kids, and you are so attuned to this woman's face, and you see her eyebrows furrow, and something in you braces for retaliation, for a slap. It's stunning that decades after your growing up years, your body, our bodies, this is what we know about trauma. Decades later, our bodies still brace themselves to be hit when we read a particular facial expression on mom. We're limbic creatures, which means that we're constantly reading facial expressions. We're constantly reading tone of voice, and we're bracing for what our brains have learned is soon to follow. What's it like for you now to realize that decades after your growing up years, your body still braces for that slap?
Yeah. I think there was real sadness, even as I was writing this story, to think that my body still remembers and doesn't want to receive. I mean, in that moment, I didn't even want to receive any goodness from her, had any goodness been there. Yeah, I would say sadness that I still had to think about protecting the kids that were sitting there,
Right.
in case she reached out and did something. I was ready to react.
Yes.
On their behalf.
And then as your mom begins to do this OCD stuff, this obsessive compulsive stuff, you have this really important sentence where you just say to yourself, Autumn, it was as bad as you remember. And then here's really the critical sentence. You are not crazy. Thank God that she turned the pillow a half turn so that all the lines would line up together. You needed to experience the craziness as an adult so that you could validate what it was like for you as a girl.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on in that moment, right? And one of the things is you're relieved. Like, this is awful. And there is relief for your heart.
So when we have to write out our story and you have to then reread what you wrote, the question always lingers, like, really? Was it really that bad?
Right.
Come on. It couldn't have been that bad. It really couldn't have been that bad. What are you being such a baby about? What are you complaining about? All of those things come into your mind. So to see her in her, even with the 4 squares of toilet paper, like, she would count them each out as she was unrolling the toilet paper roll. And even the trauma of being in the bathroom with her. Oh, it was awful. It was awful. And being able to remember some of those stories, even that I thought I had forgotten, were coming back to me, watching the crazy unfold and being able to say that it was this bad. It really was this bad.
And if we are faithful to continue to engage our parents, God will give us experiences that validate what has been true of our stories.
Yeah.
And that was a gift for you. As perverse as it may sound, it was a gift for your heart to know that this is what you grew up with. So your mom begins to really piss you off when she's not willing to do what she needs to be doing. And the story really gets, you start to feel some big stuff and your heart starts beating fast. And then you begin talking to yourself, right? And you say, Autumn, you've had training, and we can all relate to this, right? It's like, we talk to ourselves and say, come on, like, you know what to do here. You know what to do. Breathe. And the rage within was so loud, is what you said. And then this sentence, as I began to breathe, I began to soften. It's not really relevant for the story per se, but I need to just take the moment to say what you're talking about is the difference between a bottom-up approach to bringing calm to our hearts and a top-down approach. So by top-down, I simply mean using our cortex, talking to ourselves to calm our limbic brain, to calm our dysregulated bodies. And a bottom-up approach is breathing. It's using our body. It's using our brainstem, bottom, the brainstem's below your limbic brain. It's using your brainstem to bring calm to your limbic brain in a very dysregulated state. this is how God designed our brains. I mean, bottom up always, and this might annoy us, but bottom up always, almost always works better and faster than top down approaches to regulating our affect. And that's what you experienced in that moment. And it's just so, frankly, holy that you didn't keep trying to talk yourself out of this, but you began to breathe. You began to breathe.
Yeah, the rage truthfully scared me.
Yeah.
Like, I have not felt that deep of rage for a really, really long time. And so I think that really was so startling to my system that was still there.
Yes. And which is why the next paragraph is all the more remarkable. And I'm just going to read it because it's just so insanely glorious. Where you went was to ask, what did I need from her that I never received? Attunement, kindness. What would kindness look like? And then you went on and you said, your heart began to settle, and I knew instantly what I needed to do. I will offer her attunement, something that she could never give me as a child. I will give her in this moment something my heart longed for from her, but never received. Kindness. There are certain stories, there are certain experiences that are just so remarkable and full of glory. Part of me just wants to sit here in silence because it's just such an amazing moment. A desire stirs in you to give your mother the one thing you most needed from her and the thing you never got from her. And when I hear that portion of the story, I think of the verse, overcome evil with good. This is what that verse is talking about. So even as I talk about this portion with you, what's happening for you? What's it like for you to revisit this portion of the story?
If there were a couple of things that would describe who I have become, who I've come to embrace of who I was as a child, that is an intensely spiritual young girl with a ton of faith. People still ask me, like, how do you just keep going? And it's like, I don't know, because I just know that God is in there somewhere and it's going to be okay. In that moment, I kept thinking, Lord, I don't want to go to my grave hating my mother. I don't want her to go to her grave that way, and I don't want to go to my grave hating my mom.
And to say that this was an act of repentance, I mean, I don't know a more robust definition of repentance than for you in this moment with, as you put it, frightening rage.
Yeah.
To, in that moment, literally turn around and go in a very polar opposite direction, which is to gift her with the very thing that she never gave to you. It's just stunning.
Yeah.
You can tell me if this fits for you or not, but when these moments happen in our lives, it is this simultaneous sense of, I did that and God gifted me with that.
Yeah. Gratitude was probably the overarching thing that I was able to pull from. And that is gratitude that God has given me so much, such richness in my own life, because I chose to engage my story. I am so grateful for who I am today, because I never would have ever reached that had I not chosen to be curious and engage in the awfulness of my story.
Which is why it's just so unreal to hear the sentence a couple paragraphs later where you say, my heart began to weep as I realized that I had to be the one to parent my parent, but yet I felt full. So, there's only one word to describe this: redemption. To be weeping in grief and yet feeling full and alive. Say some about it. I don't know that there are words to say about it, but can you speak to it?
I don't know. I think you're right. There are no words to adequately even talk about what that feeling is, except for it is a glorious moment. It is really, truly a glorious moment, especially with a woman that I thought I would never, ever have the chance because of her Alzheimer's. I never thought that I'd ever be able to connect in any way with her, ever.
Right. The additional glory of the story is that, and this is where you go next, is being able to engage my younger heart the way it so deserved to be engaged surprised me. One of the stunning gifts about this story for you is you're not only engaging your mother with just immense kindness, but you're engaging your own heart, your younger heart. I like how you put that. In a way that you really needed.
Yeah.
So can you say more about what do you mean when you say engaging your younger heart?
I think that I was a parent to my mom for most of my life, and I did not cut myself slack ever. So I was really harsh when I would think about my younger years and who I was and how I was. Boy, there was not room for goodness or kindness. Okay, so there was no space for me to have needs for myself. Like, I was being selfish. I was a self-centered kid. Only asking for needs was not something that was allowed. So being able to give the tenderness to my teenage girl who desperately just wanted some kind of kindness in her own life, that was twisted, of course, in my teen years for being self-centered.
And here's what I love about this story. Like, there is these moments in the story where you are full of rage and you are feeling these intense feelings. And unlike what was forced upon you as a girl, you were able to now kind of tend to just your own bodily sensations, your own big emotions. And in this story, you move in a posture of really kindness for your own heart. And it's in many ways, it's the reversal of what you had to do as a 12-year-old.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's shift in a little bit of a little bit different direction, because this story is present, recent. But you've already mentioned this teenage girl and the weight that was on her shoulders as she was not only parenting another, but she was not being parented. How has your posture towards that girl changed over the years?
I would say it has greatly softened. And also, I would say another word would be that I've been able to honor the strength and the courage that she had as a young woman growing up and navigating life a lot on her own. Mostly on her own. And she navigated some incredibly terrifying and awful things in her life alone. I didn't have parents who attuned to my heart. And so I had to figure out ways in which to navigate that. And I did. And I did it in heroic ways, actually, becoming kind of the hero of my own story. And but again, had I never worked on my story, would have never been able to even say that about her.
That's one of the ironies about engaging our stories. When we are faithful to enter the darker portions of our story, we find, surprisingly, a fair bit of glory has been either evidenced in our hearts from the beginning or created by God in the midst of horror. And that's what you're putting words to, that you see yourself now as an incredibly strong younger girl. And you found that heroine through looking at some of the hardest stories of your life.
Right. Yep.
We've looked at certain parts of this story, but I'm wondering, are there any portions or is there anything that you want to add here towards the end about this story and about your experience with your mom?
Yeah. As I reflected after I wrote this story for this podcast, and I was reflecting on it again, and I was reading it and rereading it, the thing that I wanted to take a section out that I had written, and that was where I told you the truth of what was going through my mind, and that was I wanted to snap my mother's neck. I wanted to kill her. That was a real feeling I had, and I think that was the most shocking for me. But as I was reflecting about that and recent work that I've done on that portion of my story, is that there was a story that cropped up where when I was 17 years old, my dad was having some heart issues, and my mom sat me down and she said, I want you to know, if your dad dies, it's your fault. You're the one who killed him. And what I had not realized for all those years until I began working on that part of my story is that I really was carrying death and life in such a powerful way as part of the way that I lived my life out. And so in this moment, being able to engage with kindness, it was breaking a curse that had been spoken over me, that I somehow have the power of life and death in my hands.
Yeah, and it's so easy in that moment in the story where you realize you have murderous rage for your mother. It's so easy in that moment to flash back to that younger time with your dad and to say, see, she was right. You're a murderer. When you say you were breaking a curse, what does that mean?
What I mean by that is those were words that were spoken over me that I took to heart. Like, I really felt responsible for my dad's health, his failing health. And I felt that my behavior, because in those days they would have said that I was rebellious. Today, I will tell you, I was more true to myself in those years. And I was probably more God honoring in those years than any other time in my life. And so, yeah, in that moment, those words were heavy. They were a weight that I've carried. And even with a fear of death that was attached to that. And not that I was thinking this through in the moment, but upon reflection, I can look back and say that was when I took my sword out with kindness. And I went, hell no, hell no, you're not going to control me anymore.
What you're putting words to about cursing is very real. There are times in our stories when words are spoken over us. And that's what your mother did. She spoke words over you and she named you a killer.
Yep.
And those words have efficacy in the world. Words are very powerful. And we are fooling ourselves if we think that words spoken over us in moments of intensity don't have weight and don't continue to play out for decades.
Right. Yep.
Which is why this story is just so beautiful in the reversal in many ways of that curse. And really, we could put it this way. You stopped joining. I know those are my words and not your words, but I can tell you're nodding in agreement. What do you mean? What do I mean? What do we mean when we say you stopped joining?
I think that there's a place where we unentangle ourselves from the notion that something that is such an incredible lie no longer can have power over my life anymore. So it's disentangling. It's a way of like untying the knot and going, oh yeah, no, it no longer has any power or control to the way that I manage my life.
Right. And so when you say hell no to the curse, you are in fact breaking a curse over your life. And those words of hell no, of disentangling, that has an effect in the cosmos. It has an effect in the world, and it sets you free.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really nice because you can breathe better.
Right. Right.
So, Autumn, this has been such a privilege for me to just hear the story, that you shared the story with me, with our listeners, and then to be able to see your face as we reflect on it together. Thank you for this gift.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for the work that you do. I have 9 lay counselors that I oversee, and every single one of them listens to your podcast. And they love listening because of the information that you offer and the clarity in which you speak it is really profound, and it's so needed. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. That's a great encouragement to my heart. Thanks for listening, everyone. It would be really awesome if you would consider supporting this podcast monetarily. There are many expenses associating with producing it, and you can help fund the podcast by going to adamyoungcounseling.com and clicking on support the podcast. If you contribute $1 for every episode that you've enjoyed, that would really be tremendously helpful. Music for this podcast was provided by Rob Mathis and Rick Wilson. Thank you, Rob and Rick. See you next week.